Welcome to FRE Lunch, the official podcast of the Food and Resource Economics Department at the University of Florida. I'm Elena Poulin, the Marketing and Communications Specialist for the department.
And I'm Caleb Stair, Assistant Instructional Professor of Food and Resource Economics and the Coordinator for Undergraduate Research in the department, meaning I get to interact regularly with the members of our UF community and see all the cool and interesting topics being explored.
That's why we made this podcast, to showcase the many ways students and faculty are using research to understand and address the complex issues facing agricultural and natural resource industries.
In 2025, there's lots of interesting issues that economics can be applied to, but that's only one faucet of the whole solution.
To get the complete picture on one of these issues, we're teaming up with the UF Water Institute and new co-host Sarah Mark for a deep dive into the fathoms of Florida's fresh water.
Hi, I'm Sarah Mark, the Communications and Events Specialist for the Water Institute. Essentially, we serve as a connector between collaborators across the university and beyond.
From kayaking to cave diving, there are many ways to enjoy Florida's freshwater lakes, rivers, springs.
Caleb, we only have 15 minutes. There's way too many bodies of water to list.
Right, sorry.
Anyways, what Caleb is trying to get at here is that today we've got a really exciting topic for you: freshwater tourism.
Each year, over 120 million visitors come to the state, and many of them are engaging in nature-based tourism activities.
And it's not just visitors. Our own residents are often traveling to engage in activities such as fishing, hiking, swimming, and more.
All of this activity, it's great for our economy. But how do we measure that impact? And more importantly, how can we find ways to strike the appropriate balance between responsible management and active engagement within our environment?
That's what we're here to find out.
We are joined today by two guests who are both experts in aspects of freshwater tourism.
My name is Sergio Alvarez, Associate Professor at the University of Central Florida, the Rosen College of Hospitality Management, and I teach Tourism Economics.
And my name's Taylor Stein. I'm a professor in the School of Forest, Fisheries, and Geomatics Sciences. I'm professor and associate director in the school, and my specialty is in ecotourism and sustainable recreation management.
Sergio first got involved in aspects of freshwater tourism later in his career.
Before, when I was younger, I was more interested in dry land ecosystems, in mountain ecosystems. And then when I was a PhD student, FRE, at the University of Florida, I got involved in fisheries-related research. And my advisor was a big part of that sort of like move away from land ecosystems and toward water ecosystems.
His interest in water resources solidified after working on the Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
So when I was a PhD student, the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill took place, and I ended up doing an investigation of basically the economic losses to recreational fishermen who would normally go out to fish in the Gulf, but because of the oil spill, they just either didn't want to go fish in oil-tainted waters, or they just couldn't because the federal government had closed off certain areas. So that's how I ended up becoming very interested in water resources. And then after my PhD, I went to work in Tallahassee for the state government. And water being such an important part of Florida, this interest sort of continued, and that's kind of where I am now.
On the other hand, Taylor started on the West Coast and came east for his career.
So my background is in understanding sustainable recreation management and ecotourism. And not surprisingly, a lot of that happens around water resources. That's where people want to go. And we'll talk about all the wonderful values that attract people to those places. So over my career, I started out in the western U.S. that's actually fairly arid, and water was not a big deal. But kind of like Sergio mentioned, you kind of start getting pulled into it. So when I first got actually the offer to work at UF, and I was on my way to move down to Florida, I got in contact with an aquatic preserve, Rookery Bay Aquatic Preserve. So that was my first project in Florida. So I started right off working with boaters and anglers and beachgoers. And it was like a great way to start my job in Florida because it's very typical Florida recreation.
So why is today's issue such a big deal? Well, sure, water is all around us, but that means we don't spend a lot of time thinking about it.
In my opinion, fresh water is really one of the most precious resources we have on this planet in all its forms. So obviously we have the big bodies of fresh water, such as rivers, lakes. These serve as sources of drinking water, sources of irrigation, but also sources of recreation. So people like to go to wherever you go in the planet. People like to go to the waterways.
These water resources are what a lot of people picture when they think of the Sunshine State. But with more people moving to the state and additional visitors, these resources become more popular. And as demand for a resource rises, so do the challenges of maintaining it.
So I would say that Florida, our state economy is based on development and growth, but now we're coming to see the limits of that growth.
Some of those impacts include things like septic tanks, paving over porous surfaces, and runoff from roadways.
That's a really good description of what's going on in Florida with overall development. I can target it a little bit more for tourism and recreation, though, and I'm going to say the obvious. Everything that Sergio just said is magnified around private lands that are close to coastal and freshwater areas, because that's where people want to live. All those benefits that people travel to Florida into water areas for recreation and leisure. Well, what if you can have that in your backyard? Or what if that is just down the street? Well, clearly that's where the development's going to be, right? So all those impacts, the concrete development, the stormwater runoff, the pollution that comes from that, well, now it's all focused and close to the very sensitive water resources that we use.
But it's not all bad. Whether the visitors are residents or people coming from out of state, many areas rely on their economic impact.
To be a tourist, by definition, you have to spend at least one night outside of your home. So, if you're in Gainesville and you go to High Springs for the day, go to Ecotourism, you are not a tourist because you are going back home. Right. And so in sort of being really strict in our definition of tourism, that wouldn't count as tourism. But being sort of more open, when you think about the visitor economy in Florida, we're talking about almost $100 billion per year overall. So that includes the theme parks, but it includes also all the beach resorts, all the beach towns, all of the springs, all of the people in airboats out in the Everglades, all of that stuff. So like Taylor is saying, any sort of like study that we do in Florida regarding recreation and outdoor recreation, tourism, nature-based tourism, it is going to be in the billions.
This nature-based tourism gives us a lens to advocate for preserving certain conservation areas.
We see that there's so many conservation initiatives all over Florida, and they almost always pass, but you'll notice in almost every case, there is a recreation spin to it. It's not that you're just going to buy land, it's you're going to buy land and you're going to be able to access it. And so in many cases, that is kind of a hidden benefit that we don't often understand. But there's also obvious benefits. Money when we pay to go into public lands, a lot of that money goes to the protection of those lands. Hunting and fishing, when they even buy their equipment, a lot of that equipment that they're buying, there is a tax with that specifically goes to conservation. So there are some direct economic impacts that then go and help manage those areas.
These include the obvious costs like buying land, hiring park rangers, maintaining your maintenance tools.
But there are also hidden costs.
So I think that the costs of management, the costs of buying land, the costs of keeping people out or, regulating the types of uses that can be had in certain lands or certain waterways, for example. These things they're easy to calculate, right? We need this number of people, we need this number of boats, we need this number of machines, we need to have this much millions of dollars to buy this many acres. So that part is readily calculated. The part that I like to focus on is the hidden costs of not conserving, the hidden costs of not spending that money, because people will say, well, it's too expensive to hire the people to properly manage this area, right? That's kind of what they're saying. Or it's too expensive to protect the waterway. Right? It's too expensive to regulate the types of land uses. But what we are not looking at is what is the cost of not doing that? So what is the cost of this degradation of the environment? And so here in Florida, we experience that cost as a loss in tourism revenue.
Like Sergio says,
It can be hard to do a cost-benefit analysis on management strategies without an accurate way to capture the value of the resources you are managing.
Water is also a little weird because it isn't traded or sold like a traditional good.
And so here what we have is a good that is in essence not traded in markets. Again, like for example, in my house, I have a well and the well is completely unregulated. This is why I use for irrigation. And so the cost to me of the water that I pump out is really just the cost of the pumping. So the electricity that it takes to run that pump. That is the only thing that I'm paying for that water. And the economists would say, oh, it is because there is no market for that water, right? That you don't have to pay. And so how do we put, in essence, a price on something that is not traded in markets?
One way you can place a value on the resource is with revealed preference. Actions speak louder than words. So, for example, how much did you pay due to the springs?
Another method is called hedonic pricing. This is where we attempt to measure the value of something by how it affects the price of something else. Like, how does a shift in water quality affect your home prices or your housing prices?
In addition to revealed preference, there is also stated preference.
Then there's also stated preference, where we just ask people straight up, would you be willing to pay $5 more in your water utility bill if that money that was collected were to be used for conservation or for improving water quality or for restoring the riparian area so that it would be better quality, or for bringing in, let's say, largemouth bass or other fishes that you could then, fish recreationally. So that is what we call contingent valuation or choice experiments, where you're directly asking people if they would be willing to pay a particular amount to get a desired result.
These studies give us a better way to estimate for the value that these resources provide.
Thank goodness economists like Sergio have come around to kind of figure out how to use accurate methods to capture that. And then what we do is we're blown away by the numbers. I mean, when the little estimates that we said, it's into the billions, and it's amazing. So I'm glad economists exist like Sergio, and I'm glad I don't have to do it. But I use your numbers all the time, Sergio.
Well, I'm glad that people value the work that economists do, because it is important. And one thing that I learned when I worked for the state government is something that doesn't get estimated, something that doesn't have a value on paper, then the assumption is that the value is zero. So that is why it is so important to use these methods, to use them appropriately, and really to publicize the results and to get people to understand how valuable our conservation areas, our waterways are.
Of all the things we have talked about today, Wekiva Springs sort of has it all. It's located just outside of Orlando.
So you got a good mix of local, state, private, and then again, I said it's a national scenic river, so even the National Park Service is involved. Really cool example of partnerships and working together to really capture capture the value that area offers in terms of recreation and tourism, but also it provides more capacity to then manage for the extreme uses that area gets.
Some of the new methods being used serve as great examples of the best recreation management practices that are being taught in Taylor's class.
So one example, I think Wekiva State Park's one of the first state parks in Florida that has a reservation system now. So you can't just go like a year ago. You could go and you would be standing in a car line that goes out to a major highway, which is actually fairly dangerous, and waiting in your car as people leave the park, you would be coming in. Now they have a reservation system that seems to make a lot of sense. I mean, and now it's a little bit more organized. And if you plan a little bit of ahead, you can get into the park on a busy Saturday now. And what I'm saying, that goes back to my last question. That is innovative, kind of hard to do management, right? I mean, a reservation system seems easy, but you got to have the web system for it. You got to have people ready to do it. It's a whole complicated thing that the state parks have waited decades to do because it's so hard. But in some places, they've done it. And that is good recreation management right there. Managing a really hard issue, because Wekiva is wonderful and great, and everybody in Orlando knows that.
As we move forward, we need to remember these resources are vital, and yet they are often undervalued.
If we didn't have water in the world, where would we be? Well, we wouldn't be here, right? But it's Since it's such a cheap resource that we pay for it economically, I do feel that people undervalue it. It's only a few cents, if that, a gallon, if you turn on your tap at home. So I think the actual value that we place on water resources isn't quite in the public's consciousness. However, we do see it in recreation and tourism. It is a massive, massive draw for people. But then we say, why is it? What is the value that it offers?
Which is why we need to find alternative ways to better understand their value.
I would say again, the key sort of premise of non-market valuation is really important. Just because there is no profit being made, no companies that are, in their quarterly reports are reporting the value of water, that does not mean that water does not have a value. Right? It just means that our economic system, our markets just are not accounting for the value of some of these resources. But these resources are extremely important for our societies and for every individual. So I think that's the key takeaway for me.
In order to keep our access to them, management strategies are necessary.
My takeaway is we need to manage for it. If we just assume it's going to happen and we're always going to have these resources out there waiting for us, then we're going to lose them. And I think we kind of understand this through land acquisition and we protect these areas. But I want people to know, what I teach in my class is that recreation management is a thing.
This recreation management that Taylor talks about not only protects our waterways from harm, it also opens up new avenues for future generations to fully enjoy them.
We're at risk at having a lot of harmful effects happen to our sensitive conservation lands, which are most happening in water-based areas. That's where some of our most sensitive areas are. But the biggest cost is all the benefits we're not grabbing. By not having people trained in how to manage for recreation and visitation, they are not providing opportunities for the kids out there and the people who really can benefit by going into nature.
So the moral of this story is use them or lose them. So we hope you will go out and responsibly enjoy a park in your area.
And if you see a park ranger while you're there, make sure to thank them.
We have now reached the end of our water season.
While we've had a great time, we're all tapped out on water topics. For now. We reserve the right to reclaim water in the future.
We would like to thank the UF Water Institute and all of our guests for joining us for these past several episodes.
And we would particularly like to thank Sarah Mark for the role she played this season. You all don't see what goes into making each episode, and she was a big, big part of that.
Finally, we'd also like to thank you, the listeners. Without you, FRE lunch would just be food waste.
Our goal with this season has always been to showcase that research doesn't happen on its own, in a box, on an island, away from anything else.
We hope that this season has motivated you to reach out to someone outside of your field or stream, and maybe that conversation leads to collaboration.
The Water Institute will continue on even after this season, and if you would like to continue having these interdisciplinary water communications, then register to attend the 10th Biannual Symposium. Link is in the description.
And in the wake of this season, FRE Lunch will also continue on, so stay tuned for updates on the next seasonal menu for your FRE Lunch.
If you've made it this far, you've finished the entire episode, and we thank you for that. Tune in next time for more food for thought. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of FRE Lunch. We hope you'll come back again for seconds.